Good evening. Once again, we've come to another day in our lecture, Measurement and Evaluation. To begin with, I want us to share something in this era of COVID-19, and it is on effective medicine. What we need to understand is that no medicine is effective without an effective brain. The healing by the brain precedes medical healing. That means that if you get healed, you will get healed from the mind first before physically you get healed. And so what we need to note is that your state of health is in your state of mind. It is your mind that determines your health. So if your mind tells you you are sick, you will be sick. If you are healed in the mind, you are healed physically. So get healed mentally and you get healed physically. And that is how we start our class. In our previous discussion, we looked at the nature of assessment, where we said that assessment is the process by which we obtain information for decision making. And because we are talking about educational measurement, educational assessment, we are talking about making decisions in the domain of education. So anything about education, be it on the student, on the policy, program, whatever, if you are making decisions about anything related to education, we are within assessment in education. We saw that a test is a task that is given to students in order to measure a particular trait. And so we are not limited to pencil and paper tests, but any task at all that you give to students with which you measure a particular trait is a test. When you give a test, you assign a score. That score, that number that you assign to the performance is what we are referring to as measurement. And we said that we are able to interpret numbers based on the level at which the measurements were done. We look at the nominal, where numbers are used to put attributes into categories. Beyond that, we said we have the ordinal, where we said that apart from putting them into categories, we are able to rank them in order of magnitude. Beyond that, we have the interval, where 0 does not mean the absence of the characteristics. Then finally, we spoke about the ratio, where 0 means absence of the characteristics. We move ahead to look at evaluation, where we said that evaluation is a value judgment about a particular attribute. So if we're saying it is excellent, it is good, we are making evaluation. And so we said that assessment is evaluation plus or minus, measurement plus or minus evaluation. So when you say 5/10, that is measurement. That 5/10, what judgment are you making about it? Is it good or poor? That good or poor that you add becomes the evaluation, and that is about assessment. So with assessment, we are doing measurement and evaluation. And we also saw that for evaluation, we have the formative and the summative. The formative is ongoing. It is tied to teaching and learning. And we have the summative, which is done at the end of the instruction, at the end of a particular program, end of semester, end of term. Because it is summative, because it does not influence teaching and learning. It is done at the end. Unlike the formative, which we do it to inform our teaching and learning. With that, we move on to look at the principles of assessment, where we said that you need to be clear as to what you want to measure. Then the assessment technique should match what you want to assess. We also mentioned that we need to use technology in our assessment. We also need to note that assessment is a means to an end, but not an end in itself. Then we said that it should serve the need of the learner. So these are some of the principles that we look at. And to end with that, we talk about the why we assess our student. We said we assess our student to make instructional management decisions, anything relating to our instruction. We use assessment to be able to inform us as to what to do. Where do I start with my students? Where do I end? Do they understand my lesson? Do I need to reteach? These decisions are made based on assessment, and that is instructional management decision. Apart from that, we have selection, where we use assessment to reject some and promote some. Beyond selection, to replace the selected ones into areas where they can function better, and that is placement. We also use assessment for guidance and counseling. You are able to suggest to a parent, these things that we tell the parent is based on assessment, even though that is quite not good, but we are able to make that guide and that suggestions based on assessment. Then finally, we said that assessment is used for certification and credentials. At the end of your program, you are going to be given a certificate based on assessment. Today we want to look at the classifications of assessments, and that is what we want to do today. We said we can classify. With classification, we look at the purpose. Why are we doing the assessment? And we can also look at issues like at what time do we do the assessment, and what is the structure of assessment. These are the things that we use to check assessment. So with regard to the structure, the nature, then we can talk about whether it is formal or informal. Then at the time, at what time do we do the assessment? Then we can talk about summative or formative. Then by purpose, why we are doing the assessment, we have assessment as learning, assessment of learning, assessment for learning. So I will begin looking at assessment for learning. Assessment of learning is one of the purposes for which we do assessment. So we are doing the assessment for learning. Assessment, when we talk about assessment for learning, is the process of seeking and interpreting evidence for use by the learners and their teachers to decide where the learners are in their learning. You see, it is a collaboration between the teacher and the learner. So it is a collabo, and it is normally what we do in our classroom. Where do I start? Where do I end? Are my student getting me? Oh, say we are okay, move on. So these things that we are doing, we use assessment to do these things, and that means that we are using assessment for learning. So we are saying that it's any activity done in the classroom that provides information to the teacher to modify the teaching and learning. So assessment for learning is similar to the formative assessment, where we are trying to modify teaching and learning. It is a collaboration between the teacher and the learner. Assessment for learning comprises two phases. We have the initial, which is the diagnostic assessment, and the formative assessment. So just as we said, it goes like the formative assessment. We want to modify teaching and learning. So here we use variety of information sources. We use observation, we use interview, we use questionnaire, we use a test, we use all these things to be able to acquire information to modify our teaching and learning. It could be verbal or verbal or written test that we give. So in the course of the teaching, you first you ask your student questions, then the answer. This thing that you are doing is giving you information, giving you a broader light about the teaching and learning, and then that is the nature of assessment for learning. So also we are saying that as teachers check on understanding, they adjust their instruction to keep students on track. In this case, no grades are given. You don't score. You don't score because the purpose of this one is to find out whether they have understood the lesson or not. And even if you score, you don't keep the records for anything. So once again, the class exercises, the homework that we give to our students are purely for assessment for learning. That's the purpose. And so we need not record them scores anywhere for any judgmental issue. It is only to help you to find out whether your students have understood the lesson or not. So by nature, this form of assessment is embedded in a view of teaching and learning, which is essential. It involves sharing learning goals with your learners. This is what we want to achieve for today, and that's how we want to do. So you, the teachers, you move along with the student. This is what we want to do, and this is what we want to achieve at the end of the day. Then you find out whether you have been able to do that. The aim is to help people to know the standards for which they are aiming. How well should I exhibit the attributes? It involves student self-evaluation or self-assessment. So you allow the student to do assessment as to whether they have understood the lesson or not. It also provides students an opportunity for students to learn better. So in all, that is about the assessment for learning. Then the other purpose of assessment is assessment of learning. The first one we said assessment for learning. Now we are talking about assessment of learning. As we can see, it means that learning has already taken place and you are finding out what you have learned, because we said assessment of your learning. You have already learned. What have you learned? What do you know? That is assessment of learning. This is similar to the summative assessment, where assessment is in the hands of the teacher alone. It is the teacher who decides which questions you answer. It is the teacher who is going to do the scoring. You have no business as a student. All that you do is just to sit down, take your pen and paper and begin to write whatever the teacher gives you. So the teacher wants to find out what you have learned. And so assessment of learning is the purpose of assessment that typically comes at the end of the course. So it's just like the summative assessment or units, to which the instructional goals have been achieved. We want to determine to what extent have students learned, and that is assessment of learning. Because of that, there is a grade. We assign grade to students. You are given A. At the end of the semester, I will give some of you A, some will get A minus, others will get B plus, so then the last grade, which if you want to get, you get. So that is it. So for assessment of learning, you have already learned, and we want to find out what you have learned. Assessment of learning, that becomes public. So it becomes public. The results are put in symbols. They are given out to parents to see how the students are doing, and that's how assessment of learning is. It is judgmental, just as I said. The purpose is to grade and report. Just as assessment of learning, the purpose is to modify teaching and learning. Assessment of learning, the purpose is to grade the student, and so we report and we give grade to students, and that is that. Now, what is the teacher's role? If you want to do assessment of learning, if you want to assess what your students have learned, what do you need to do as a teacher? One of them is to have a range of alternative mechanisms for assessing the same outcome. Don't forget that when we're talking about the principles of assessment, we said there should be multiple indicators. It should be comprehensive, because we're going to use this assessment for judgment, a critical decision on the student. You have to make sure that you are using alternative mechanisms. You don't use one short examination to make judgment on the student. You are going to give them certificates. You give them only one test. It will not be fair, because the conditions might not favor particular student at a point in time, at that particular time. So there should be multiple alternative mechanisms of doing assessment, and that is because we are going to use it for critical decision of the students. And then we are promoting them, we are giving them certificates, we are giving them scholarship, whatever we are going to use it for. It is very critical, and so we have to use alternative mechanism in doing assessment. Also, there should be public and defensible reference point for making judgment. On what basis? What is the marking scheme? We remember at a point in time in Ghana, at the law school, about 90% of the students failed. What the students said was that they want to see the marking scheme. So because you are using it to make critical decisions, make sure you have a marking scheme in place, a marking scheme that you can defend, that you can give to, this is how I did the scoring. Most of the time, teachers write their items without marking scheme. They go to their houses, they sit somewhere, and they look at what the students write, they give a score without any guideline. That is wrong. Should the student come to challenge the grade or the score, you will have any evidence. So because we are doing assessment of learning and you are using it for critical decision, you need to have a marking scheme, a reference point. How did you do the judgment? And this thing should be transparent. It should be transparent, that everybody will understand. We all see that this is how it was done. Then you should have strategies to address any disagreement. That is why you have the right to challenge a grade that you are giving, because the lecturer has the marking scheme there. It's something that he is not hiding. You can go for it. This is how I did the scoring. And if there's any agreement, you'll be able to settle it out. And so that's what we need to do as a teacher if you are using assessment of learning. So we have already spoken about assessment for learning. It's a collaboration between the teacher and the student, and that is what we normally do in our classroom. Assessment of learning is what we do at the end of the term, at the end of the semester. The student has no business. All that you do is just sit down, take the test. They will give you your grade, and that is all. The last purpose of assessment is assessment as learning. So we have assessment for learning, assessment of learning, and assessment as learning. In this case, it is the assessment that we are using as the process of learning. Learning has not taken place. We are using the assessment as a medium of learning. They are learning by assessment. And so we are saying that assessment as learning is the process of helping students to be able to learn about themselves. In this case, assessment is in the hands of the student. Assessment of learning, it is the teacher who controls assessment. Assessment as learning, it is the student who controls assessment. Assessment for learning is a collaboration between the teacher and the student. Now we are talking about assessment as learning, where it is the student who controls assessment. So they assess themselves and not you, the teacher, assessing them. It is the student who asks themselves, what have I learned? How did I get it wrong? How did I get it correct? What should I do to get it right? They answer that particular questions and not you, the teacher. They decide the questions they answer and not you, the teacher, giving them questions. And it is the questions they are answering that help them to learn. So they are using their assessment to learn. And so we call that the metacognitive. They assess themselves. Students reflect on their own work on regular basis. So what you do when you come to what the teacher should do is you give students the opportunity to assess themselves. So in the course of the teaching, you pause. Then, based on the question that they have constructed for themselves, they begin to answer them. Maybe from the beginning, a student will write, I want to be able to define assessment by the end of the lesson. I should be able to classify assessment based on timing, purpose, structure. So the students have given themselves this objective. It is not you, the teacher, who is telling them. You give them the general objectives, and based on that, they formulate their own objectives. So the objectives differ from student to student, and that is why it becomes difficult for you as a teacher to assess them. So it is the student who assess themselves. You have given them the general objectives, and they have set their various objectives of which they are going to make sure they have achieved. So in the course of the teaching, you pause, then begin to answer the objectives that they set from the beginning. And so we are saying that the assessment is in the hands of the student. So the student reflect on their work on a regular basis. It could be peer assessment or self-assessment. They can even exchange. This is how I define my assessment. Look at it, whether it is right. So you leave everything to the student. It's in the hands of the student. And that is the way we want to go. These are the new trends in assessment that we want to use in Ghana. We used to know the assessment of learning, where the teacher comes to the class, take your exercise book, we are going to do a class test, take your exercise pen and paper, we are going to do the test, everything the teacher. But now we want to move away from that purpose to assessment as learning, where we allow the student to control assessment, and that helps them to learn. Now, features of assessment as learning. It begins as students become aware of the goals of instruction. Like I said earlier, from the beginning, you tell the student, for today, this is what we want to achieve. You tell the student. And after that, the student will set their own goals. Students set their own goals, and that helps them to learn. Then what you do as a teacher is to monitor. So you pause. You can even ask them from the beginning, Kofi, what did you say you want to be able to do? Have you been able to do it? What did you do? So your role as a teacher is to just monitor what the students are doing, and you allow the student to reflect on their learning as to whether they have done well or not. And the student will be able to tell you, I've understood a lesson, if they ask themselves, In the class, we normally ask, do you understand? And you get the chorus answer, yes sir. As to whether the student have understood the lesson or not, it is the student who can tell you. It's not you, the teacher. That chorus answer is not a clue to whether they have understood the lesson or not. Because every do you understand, the response should be yes sir. That's what we want to know. So whether they have understood or not. In the classroom, you tell your student, you ask your student, do you understand? Yes sir. Then do this exercise for me. Hey sir. So the third for the yes sir is just a routine. But if they are asking themselves whether they have understood the lesson, then they can tell you indeed they have understood the lesson. So as a teacher, your role is to guide the student in developing a self-assessment. It should help them to be able to assess themselves. So how do they do that? You give them a mechanism to validate an answer. If it's mathematics, the teacher can work out the solution on the board. Then they look at it themselves. So even if you put a question on the board, you don't mark it, they mark it themselves. So you put the solution on the board, they look at it step by step. Where did I get it wrong? Why did I get it wrong? How should have been the answer, or what should have been the correct thing? So you do these things and they do the assessment themselves. They do the thinking themselves. In the case where the teacher, you just mark, the student don't know how they got it wrong or how they got it correct. So you allow the student to do that. So you only provide opportunity for the student to do the self-evaluation. Then you monitor the student mental analysis of what they have done, and you provide feedback to them. One other thing, that you need to create an environment for them to be able to do the self-evaluation. Sometimes the student will come to you and say, I did this thing at home, I want you to look at it for me. Hey, I'm busy. Especially when at the end of the month the salaries are not in and you are hungry, a student come to you, say, I've written this essay, I want you to mark for me. Then you shout at the student. If you want the student to be able to assess themselves, then we create that opportunity for them. That will be safe for them to be able to them, and that is about assessment as learning. Then the student need to engage in self-assessment. Like I said earlier on, they can do it themselves or they can allow their peers to do it for them. So we can do the comparison between the three: assessment of learning, assessment for learning, assessment as learning. So that will be the purpose. When we come to the next classification, which is by structure, the nature of it, then we can have informal assessment and formal assessment. Informal assessment, it has no formality, very flexible. It is done anytime you want to do it, you can do it. There's no manual, there's no time to do it, there's no marking scheme. And that is what we do in our classroom. The questions and answers, the class exercise, the homework, the dictation we give them, all these things are informal assessment. They are loosely done. There's no structure. It is the teacher who set his own question. You mark when you want to mark, and that is it. But with this informal assessment, some uses tests, like the assignment, the class test, the homework. They use tests. Others do not use tests. And we have ecological assessment. We have observation. Yes, observation is part of informal assessment. In this case, we are not using any test. We're only looking at the way the students are even responding to your item. Sometimes when you are teaching, you can even look at the faces of your students to know whether they have understood the lesson or not. So as you teach, look at the faces of your students. You can see from their face. When they frown their face, it means it is not well with them. When you see them nod, it means they are okay. So that observation alone is assessment, and that belongs to the informal assessment, the one we are not using a test. Some informal assessment uses tests. They use tests. Others do not. Observation, you don't use a test, but the class exercises, the class tests, and the others are informal assessment that uses a test. From there, we move to a formal assessment. By the name, it is formal, and so we have rules and regulation. When do we start? We have the same time starting. We have a marking scheme. Example of this formal assessment is the WASI, the BEC that we write. Sometimes this district mock 2, we can consider that to be a formal assessment because there is a structure, there is a marking scheme, there is a procedure how to do the scoring. how to do the administration. We are all starting at 8. If a student is late for 30 minutes, don't allow the student to write. So this thing is common, and it is done at the same. So there's uniformity in the assessment, and that is a formal assessment. It's very structured. The marking schemes are there, the same thing. Then when we come to the timing, when do we assess? Then we have formative assessment and summative assessment. Like we talk about evaluation, when the assessment is done in the course of teaching and learning, it is tied to teaching and learning, then it is ongoing, then that becomes formative. Then the one that is done at the end of the entire program, that becomes summative. So we want to look at a typical example of the formative assessment, which is continuous assessment. A continuous assessment is a way that we want to judge student performance on daily basis. At a point in time, we never had these things like continuous assessment. When you trace the history of assessment in Ghana, when education started in the castles, there was nothing like these things. You only go take your final exams, and whatever you take, you get is your examination. University of Ghana used to have it, even though they used to do continuous assessment. It was not part in the grading. So you go to the school from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester. All that you are waiting for is your end of semester examination. If you write whatever score you get, you are graded based on that. Even though they were taking some exercises, but that were not even compulsory. I remember even before, at the time that we even went, I think there was nothing like internal, so these things were not there. You just go, if you are given an assignment, you can decide to do it or not. You are only waiting for the next semester. So Ghana, we used to have that, but we had the continuous assessment, which is a formative assessment, where we wanted to have a fair knowledge about student performances on daily basis, and that's how we have the continuous assessment. So the definition implies that a student final grade after a program of instruction is aggregation of the performance exhibited by the formative assessment and the final exam. You see, the formative and this continuous assessment allows all the other domains of learning to be assessed. There's no way we can construct an item end of semester examination to measure attitude. No, you can't assess your student attitude based on an essay they write. But however, you can observe them in a class and give them a score for their attitude, their participation. You can assess that and give a score. So the continuous assessment allowed all domains of learning to be assessed, unlike the summative assessment, which we can't assess all the domains of learning. So we are saying that by characteristics, the continuous assessment is cumulative by nature. We add up from, if you take the BEC, or if the BEC begins from your class 1, first term, your first term exercise that, or the first term score is added to the second term, to the third term, you get your first term. So we add up. Even within the term, we add up from all the exercises that we have done, the homework, the exercises, the class tests. We add up. We get a score for your continuous assessment within the term. We add to the end of term. We add up to the second term. So it is adding up, and that is the nature of the continuous assessment. It is comprehensive in the sense that we are able to assess all domains of learning, from cognitive to psychomotor. We are able to assess all. Like I said, we are able to score attitude. You look at the punctuality of the student, and then you give a score. You look at the way the student have been doing certain things, you give a score, which cannot be done in the summative assessment. So it is comprehensive. It is diagnostic in nature, and that is the fact that it helps us to know the true strengths and weakness of the student. So when you go to the hospital, the doctor will be asking you questions. Do you vomit? And do you feel feverish? Do you see visions or whatever? So the doctor will be asking you so many questions. The doctor wants to find out your rare problem, and so we are saying the doctor is doing diagnostics. So in the same way, we do this assessment to diagnose the student problem. So we want to know the strength and weakness of the student in the classroom, and that is with the continuous assessment. Also, it is formative because we give immediate and constant. We are always doing it, and so it is formative by nature. It is guidance oriented. We are able to, based on that, to give guidance. So the first class test, the student did not perform. The second one, the first one he had 0, second one he had 2, so you can see the student is improving. So based on that, we are able to track the student performance, and based on that we can provide an informed guidance to the student as to how to learn or what could be done. It is also systematic because it is planned. From the beginning of the term, we plan the whole continuous assessment, that we are going to give a class test at the end of the first week. The second week we are going to do that. So it is planned, and that is how systematic it is. Now when we come to the strengths of continuous assessment, we are saying that it provides a excellent picture about student performance, because we are doing it over time, so we can describe the student well. Also, it enables the teacher as well as the school administration to be actively involved in assessment. Because we are to assess them always, we do a class test. If there was nothing like continuous assessment, students wouldn't take a test. Teachers will not give questions for students. So the continuous assessment provides opportunity for all to be involved in assessment. It also helps to measure important domains, like I said earlier on. They're able to measure cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. It also helps to minimize students' fear and anxiety about failure and examination. Assuming that there was nothing like continuous assessment, you know of your end of semester examination, and that day you are sick, or on that day your boyfriend breaks with you. I don't know what you are going to write on that day. So that means that you are going to fail. But if you have continuous assessment, quiz 1, 20/20, quiz 2, 39 or 39/40 or whatever. So going into the end of semester, you have the VIM, because at least you have some marks behind you. So that fear, I will fail, that fear will not be there, because you know the continuous assessment has given you some backing, so it has pushing you, and you are sure that at least you are through with it. Also, the continuous assessment help the student to learn throughout the whole term. Assuming there will not be any quiz, there will not be any assignment, there will not be anything. I'm not sure some of you will even attend lectures. You attend lectures because they will take a quiz. You attend lectures because you're always learning because of quiz or whatever. And students learn only when they have a quiz. No quiz, no addition. So that is that. It also helps you to assess certain aspects which is not in the syllabus. Now, the summative assessment is constructed based on the syllabus, but in the course of the teaching, you can bring in certain things which you think is important but not in the syllabus. Then you assess your student on it. If you are teaching social studies, now you don't have COVID in our syllabus. You can introduce COVID, assess your student on it. Or you can even, like I'm teaching measurement and evaluation, I can begin to bring some issues in marriage, then be asking questions on it, because I've seen it is important. So it helps you to even bring in maybe things that are not in the syllabus. So we move away from that bookish kind of thing and assess other important things. Then it gives constant feedback to the student. So the student know their progress, whether they are progressing or retrogressing. It's also an instrument for it gives an opportunity to record students, keep records of student performances. So when you go to your school now, you can go back and check how you perform, because your continuous assessment is there. But if your school is no more, please don't go. There's nothing there for you. But those who have their school still in existence, your basic school in existence, you can go there and they will track their records for you. So that is the importance or the strength of continuous assessment. We can look at the weakness of continuous assessment. One of them was the increase in workload of teachers. Every day, because of the continuous assessment, every day you have to give exercise, you have to record them. Assuming you are a class 2 teacher teaching 90 students, every day you have to give exercise for all the subjects and record the scores. That is a tedious work to be done, but that was what was supposed to do. So it was quite tedious because the workload was very high. Also, you need some kind of skills to be able to construct good items. At the time, there was nothing like assessment as a course at the training college. Now I know those are the training college take assessment. At our time, there was nothing like assessment. So you come out as a teacher, you only do what you think you can do, and so the continuous assessment was sick when it was not done well, because even the teacher has no idea about assessment. Then there was inadequacy of materials. Some schools don't even have the records where to keep them. So what do? They can't buy, so they leave it somewhere. A teacher will write it and keep it in his house. Also, the continuous assessment because it depended on the school, the biases were there. It lacked uniformity. In one school where they think the students are good, they are giving them difficult questions to write as even class tests. In one school, they are giving them 1+1, and they are recording these scores to affect the BEC. That means that in the school where they gave them the easy questions, they are going to have a better continuous assessment than those that were given difficult questions. That may mislead us to think that those who had the easy questions are better than those who took the difficult questions whilst in school. So it lacked uniformity. Another thing is that in the history of assessment, certificates were given based on continuous assessment. Yet it ever happened in Ghana. There was no summative assessment, there was no final examination. So every school gave certificate. So if I attended Menguasi or the basic school in my village, where even class 1 they cannot write their name, and so they were given ABCD to write in class 1, and they give them a score, and they are giving them a score, and they are giving them a score, and they are giving